Hi, everyone, and thanks very much, Siobhan. I have to say, Sally has had a problem with her laptop, so she's not joined right now. So you're probably going to have to listen to me for this whole presentation, unless she pops in a little minute or two. So yeah, I'm going to talk about. And many of you will have heard a lot of these slides before because I'm going to talk about the context around data maturity. So thinking about data standards. If you go to the next slide. So, I mean, you'll all have seen this before because I talk about it all the time. We have a high-level vision for data that is data systematically used to improve decision-making, saving time, money, and lives. And I think it's always good to just reiterate that because everything that we're doing around data maturity all comes back to this, about how we make better use of the data that we manage within the public sector. Next slide, please. So usually between that high level vision and the vision that we have on data standards, I usually throw in a slide on the digital strategy. Now I've clearly forgotten to put that in this time, so apologies, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. So as many of you probably know, the digital strategy that was called Changing Nation, How Scotland Will Thrive in a Digital World was published, I think, just after Christmas this year, and that was a joint bit of work with COSLA. And what I usually like to do here is just highlight a couple of areas within that strategy where it talks about making sure that people are adopting common data standards. There's a bit about the development of a public sector-wide data catalogue, and there's talk about a data transformation framework as well. Now, all of these things I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, but I think it's useful to bring up that strategy. It was a joint strategy. Again, this is all about all of this work that we're doing is not done in isolation. You know, all of us in the public sector are trying to work in the same direction with data. And I think it's just, it's worth reiterating that all of the stuff that Sally and I are going to talk about today, really depends on all of you. It's not just us. This is a joint bit of work. But to go back to the data standards, I mean, we ran a number of workshops quite a while ago now to get a bit of a feel for the appetite that people had around data standards. And I guess we've come up with this vision, which is data standards supports the production of good quality data that can be reused. And I like to focus on this reuse bit of it because it's individual organizations have data that they need to make work for their own organization, but actually data standards is all about how we can make that data that we hold in the public sector work for all of us. It's about that reuse, and that enables a whole range of things from empowering communities, transforming products and services, and improving all those outcomes that National Performance Framework as well. Next slide, please. And yeah, so there are a range of I guess, benefits for all of us making better use of data standards. You'll know all of these already: better public services, decision making, evidence-based policies, better interoperability. And I think this is the one that I'll be really focusing on. This is making the data is more comparable and it's easier for us to exchange and reuse. And all of that helps with research and development and innovation as well. And when I talk about data standards, as I've mentioned before, and you've all heard this probably, I'm talking really specifically about the technical ways that we can share data, or we can do data reuse. And the reason I'm quite pedantic about this is I kind of don't want people to think that data standards is going to help them with their information governance or the ethical considerations that they have to take into account when they're talking about reuse. This is very much the technical ways that we could do it. You still have to think about all the ethics and information governance alongside this. And I use FAIR to describe, to sort of set out the way, or what I mean by data standards. And FAIR is an acronym. It stands for findability, so that's the discoverability of data. Things like metadata portals are all covered under that. Accessibility is the way that you make that data available for other people. So some of this ties into the 5-star open data work that goes on as well. So it's about using non-proprietary ways of publishing your data. I mean, I would love it if everyone did APIs, but we'll get there in the end. Interoperability, is all about unique identifiers, the use of unique identifiers. kind of raising up awareness of identifiers that are already in use by different parts of the public sector. It's also about things like core vocabularies, so that we have a shared understanding of a specific thing that we see in the real world, so that when somebody points to a tree and starts talking about something, another organisation who's also collecting information on it understands that they're talking about the same object. And then reuse, as I've said before, is the kind of overarching, I guess, purpose behind all of this, is to help us get better at reusing all of our digital assets. It's not just data, it's our metadata and it's our infrastructure as well. Next slide. I thought at this point I would just sort of give you a little bit of an update on where we are with some of the work around data standards, and then maybe start to bring this back to data maturity and why it's really important. So I mentioned previously that we had lots of workshops a little while ago. We're just finalising the kind of outputs of that, and I'll be publishing some reports about what we found from the workshops and the surveys that took place. But over the last month or so, we've been doing a little bit of work on setting up a community of practice on data standards. Now, some of you may already be members of that community of practice and be getting emails occasionally from myself and another colleague in my team, Ian. And we had some MSc students from the Edinburgh University Business School helping us look at what would make a good community of practice as well. So big thank you to anyone who took part in the survey or got involved in some of the interviews that they set up as well. And this was really to get us thinking about, well, what works elsewhere in the world around communities of practice? What can we learn from that? And what is it that people in Scotland want from a community of practice on data standards? So we think we've got some really good ideas, and we're working on that now. And they'll hopefully be able to share a lot more with you all about that shortly. I've kind of mentioned the development of data transformation framework, and I'm going to come back to that in a little minute. Also looking at public sector wide data catalogue. Now, this really came out of a bit of work we were doing with the COVID Data and Intelligence Network to think about how do we make it as easy as possible for people to find out the data that's held by the public sector. And we're looking at testing a little bit of a pilot, or doing a little bit of a pilot to test out what I'm calling a federated approach to this. There are lots of data catalogues that sit out there already. Many of your organisations will have your own metadata or data catalogue, and we want to think about how do we make it as easy as possible for people to find all of that information without knowing that they have to go specifically to your one. So again, I'll be sharing that, some of the thinking on this, and looking for some feedback from people as well. If anybody's interested, please get in touch. And then there's a couple of things coming up in May as well. I mean, for all of this, I talk about the community of practice as a place that we want to share information, have people talking to each other about, where they are with data standards. But we do actually need a little bit of an advisory group to help us think a little bit more about, how do some of these things work in practice? So I'm just getting together terms of reference for a kind of advisory advocacy group to help us with that. And then the other side is really starting to get into the nitty gritty about what standards do we actually want to be adopting in Scotland. And so we're going to be doing a little bit of work to look at that adoption of FAIR. How do we actually do that in reality? We can talk about FAIR at the high level, but I think there's some really good work out there already that have taken FAIR and turned it into roadmaps of how, different parts, how other countries actually have kind of used FAIR to set up a roadmap and help them really create a little, a list or catalogue of standards that they intend to follow. And we've got PhD intern going to be helping us with that bit of work as well. Next slide. So I mentioned the data transformation framework. I think most of you should know what it is, but I'll talk about that in a second. And I guess we split it down into lots of different bits. We've had another group of MSc students helping us understand how people would enter into a data transformation framework. So what is the journey for users through something like a data transformation framework, and how we could scale that a little bit as well. We're doing a bit of work with the Data Lab on this data maturity assessment project, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail about that in a minute. To help us with all of this, though, the data transformation framework, it's all about how do we help organisations understand how mature they are in managing their data assets, and what support do they need to help them improve. So there's a whole range of different things that we need here, and one of them is understanding the different types of people that we need to support as part of that as part of that improvement program. So we're doing a bit of a data persona project as well. So getting lots of different types of people who might see themselves as non-data people or leaders or technical data people to come in and talk to us about what their, what their kind of user needs are if we're, when we're setting up something like the data transformation framework. And again, there's a couple of other things planned in May as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned data transformation framework objectives. We've got, it's how to help people measure maturity and then set out the pathways by which as an organization they can improve. And really the starter point of that is to think about getting a shared vision for data maturity. And we've been doing quite a bit of work on this and we've been working with the UK government as well. But the framework in itself is not just about maturity, as I've said about 100 times already now. It's about what are the practical steps that we can help people or organizations with to make small improvements in the way that they manage their data assets. And for us, we would like these to be kind of practical, achievable and actionable, and that we can measure them as well, and that it sets up an environment in which we can all collaborate and talk to each other about it as well. And the idea here is to have maturity pathways. So if you've got a certain maturity level and we get you started on one little step, you then enter a pathway that will help you move your way through from maybe stage 1, which might, looking at the slide, is about emerging, up to stage 4, which is about innovating. So how do we get organizations onto those pathways? And I guess the aims of this framework, there's lots of different aims here. It's a big bit of work. There's the strategic element. It's about how we get the different data leaders within our organizations and our peers as well to help us. How do we drive that data transformation? What skills do we need in our organizations to think about data differently and think about the opportunities that we've got with data reuse? It will be a learning environment, so that it will provide pathways to help people, organizations, individuals develop that knowledge and skills that they need, and helping them think about how to apply it as well. And then I'll have that knowledge base too, which is about a place that people can go and find out information. And some of this could be about the community. So there's a community of people out here who've all got knowledge in lots of different areas, and how do we make the best use of all that expertise that we have as well? So that's kind of the big aims of the framework. And next slide. So if we think about the data transformation framework is this big thing, and as I said, the first little start of it really is to get this shared vision around data maturity. So we're in the middle of running a data maturity assessment project, and I guess just a little bit of context to where we got to where we are with this project. So I guess what we were trying to do is think about how can we get the public sector to improve their data quality and the way that they use data and the use of data standards as well. And we started to work with the UK government, realising that they've got an action within the UK digital UK data strategy actually has an action around a data maturity model rollout to the public sector at the UK level. So we thought, let's work together on this and let's just do a little bit of research to find out what's out there. So after a bit of initial research, discovery is there's no perfect model that we can use across the whole of the public sector. There's lots of ones that work in different ways. And then with colleagues at UK government, Sally did a little bit of work actually with a guy called Andy at ONS, and they did some deep dives into specific models to understand a little bit more about how they could be applied in the public sector, how they could be used, would they work or not. And then that really narrowed it down to 3 models that we thought looked really good, and we wanted to understand a little bit more about them. So we're now running a project that the Data Lab are actually leading on to sort of review these 3 models and understand the kind of challenges and benefits of using them. Now, the idea here isn't necessarily to go, there is one model that beats them all. I don't think that's not the outcome that we're looking at here. We're trying to understand the different situations that all of us have for doing data maturity assessments. I didn't mention this at the very beginning around the data transformation, but the idea is there's lots of different ways to enter into the data maturity, the data transformation framework. So one might be that your organization as a whole wants to do a data strategy and needs some help with it. Another entry point could be that you're doing a specific project. It could be a digital transformation project, and you want to understand how well your data asset is gonna how good your data is to be able to complete that transformation project. So there's lots of different entryways, and each of these maturity assessments will work better in different situations. And each of these models actually have different levels of support around them as well. And what we're trying to understand from this is, well, how, if we throw them out to people and get people to use them, what other levels of support do we need to wrap around this? So next slide, please. And I guess the kind of project objectives here are just to review, like, well, do they cover everything that we want them to cover? Do they use the right language? Do we understand them? Obviously, the local government one was very much designed for the use by local government. The data orchard was designed for third sector, so we might need to think about the language that's used in that to just make it a little bit more accessible for us in the public sector. And obviously all of this is about what is the fitness for using these models in the Scottish public sector as well. Next slide, please. So we managed to persuade, arm wrestle, twist arms of a number of organisations to help us to participate in this assessment project. So you can see we've got Aberdeenshire, Argyll and Bute, Glasgow, Stirling, West Lothian, we've got Education Scotland, Historic Environment Scotland, Police Scotland, Registers of Scotland, and ARE is actually the Scottish Government's agriculture and rural economy, so the farm payments team as well. So we've got those recruitments. We had an initial meeting on Monday there. What we're going to do is get each of these organisations to do one of the data maturity assessments and then review it. We're saying by the end of April. That's probably going to be pushed back into the beginning of May now. And then from that, we'll be running a number of evaluation workshops to sort of get feedback on how they found the experience, what can we learn from them. And then the aim of that is we'll get some reports and some guidance and help around, do these things work? What kind of support do we need to put in place? And then as part of that project, we're also going to have something called a focus group. So that's where we're going to report back the outcomes of that project to a wider group of people, and maybe start to see if there's any more interest there as well. And I think that is the end of this current bit. I think we'll come back to what the next steps are. But I hope that's given you a little bit of an overview about the purpose behind all of this, and why we think doing some data maturity assessments are a really good idea. Thanks very much.